The sitting is open. Dear colleagues, the first item of business this morning is the free debate. I remind members that this debate is for topics not already on the agenda agreed on Monday morning. Speaking time will be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers should start by identifying the topic you wish to raise. I will call first, on behalf of the European Conservatives, Patriots and Affiliates, Norbert Kleinwächter. Norbert, you have the floor.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender, werte Kolleginnen und
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, after 7 years, this will be my last speak in this Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. So, for my closing speech, I'd like to comment briefly on much of what we've done and what has brought together over the last 7 years. And many things have actually declined in the last 7 years, in my view. Our body is responsible for monitoring, implementing human rights, the rule of law, and democracy. Our task is also to discuss, to debate issues, to bring about an improvement in those 3 areas. In the last 7 years, however, we've seen a collapse of democratic principles, a shrinking of freedom of expression, and a rolling back of the rule of law in many of the member states of our organization. In some areas, criticism is immediately voiced by reports from this chamber. In other areas, however, this organization has neglected its role. So, dear friends, when should we actually be talking about these questions, human rights, democracy, rule of law? In situations where courts back in our member states, headed up by judges who sometimes have a narrow view, and sometimes that narrow view is due to political coloring. And those people who find themselves condemned by those courts, those judges, have just one opportunity to put things right. That's to go to the European Court of Human Rights, and that's at the heart of the system. However, we've seen that within this organization, including both the European Court of Human Rights and the Parliamentary Assembly, in some cases, we have negligently neglected those human rights. I'm talking, for example, about the right to self-determination during the pandemic. More recently, the fact that Ms. Le Pen has been excluded possibly from the presidential elections, the annulling, the cancellation of the elections in Romania. All of this has cost our organization a great deal in terms of credibility. We spend a lot of time talking, for example, about Ukraine and Russia, which is a recurrent issue. So, obviously, we often turn towards foreign opponents rather than looking inwards. And all too often, we don't say what we're for, rather than what we're just against. So, please, may I make a suggestion? I do hope that over the next few years, members of this chamber will come together to work across political lines, working in cooperation to reconsolidate rule of law, human rights.
I call now Mr. Andrei Hunko on behalf of the United European Left. Mr. Hunko, the co-chair of the political group, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Colleagues, I'd like to take this opportunity in this free debate to talk to you about some of the difficulties we've been experiencing in the most recent elections in Germany. Now, a number of you, I think, over the course of the week have been contacted by us. I've often been spoken to about this myself. What exactly happened in these elections? Let me try and give you some more systematic information on this. There are 3 problems with regard to these elections. And these were snap elections that were held on the 23rd of February. And these elections, as I said, were brought forward. And there was a very shortened preparatory period for the elections. The first problem relates to one of our colleagues, Volker Ulrich, who wasn't re-elected, even though he won his constituency. This is related to the new election legislation, and this is an issue that I'm not going to be going into more detail on. The second problem that we have related to these elections is the 213,000 registered overseas voters were overwhelmingly unable to cast their vote, despite the fact that they had been sent. They should have been sent postal votes and should have been able to vote. Now, this also concerned the German ambassador in London. And that's the second problem we have that I'm not going to go into any further detail on. We don't know, in fact, how many of the overseas German voters were actually able to cast their vote. The third issue I'd like to go into some more detail on is all the irregularities that happen with the counting of the votes. In my constituency in Aachen, for instance, my party, which had a 4.98% of the vote nationwide, very, very close to the 5% threshold, but just fell short of it. And in one polling station, there were 48 votes that were allocated to another party, and only following huge protest at this polling station was this corrected. But this is a phenomenon that we have seen throughout Germany, in fact, with problems of counting of votes, and only in certain areas of Germany was this rectified. Now, if you look at the statistics, you can see very clearly that, as before, there have been polling stations which in which a small party, such as Bündnis für Deutschland, had loads of votes, whereas a party such as ours had no votes at all. Now, this can always arise as an issue, but the problem we have in Germany, and this has never happened in the past, in fact, when you have such a close result, is the fact there's no mechanism or no means of following up on the recommendation of the Venice Commission to ensure a recount of the votes, because this is something which would be appropriate, but we can't do this. This is being referred to a committee of the newly elected Bundestag, and there's no time limit with regard to a decision that's going to be taken. So I, therefore, brought around a written declaration. I've asked a number of you to express support for this by co-signing it so that we can call on Germany to change the rules and procedures to address this issue. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you, Andrei. On behalf of the Socialists, Greens and Democrats, Anja Sirka-Brammer.
Thank you, Honourable President, dear colleagues. We are living in times when the very foundations of our democratic societies are being called upon question, not only from outside, but increasingly from within. Across Europe, we are witnessing an alarming trend. Far-right parties and authoritarian-leaning governments are attempting to reframe, reinterpret, or even restrict human rights. They question their universality. They portray them as Western values or elitist concepts. They spread a dangerous idea that rights can be selectively granted or withheld based on nationality, religion, gender identity, or political beliefs. Let us be clear. The rights enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights and its protocols are not optional. They are not up for negotiation, and they are not subject to the mood of any ruling party. They're also not abstract. They are given meaning and weight through a case law of the European Court of Human Rights. The court's judgments are not obstacles to be worked around. They are obligations to be fulfilled. And more than that, the guidance for how to build more just, more inclusive, and more resilient societies. And when states disregard these rulings, they are not just undermining legal order, they are eroding the trust on which our shared Europe is built. These rights are created in response to the darkest chapters of European history, and they were meant to be a shield, especially for those who do not belong to a majority. And yet, precisely those protections are now being painted as obstacles to national sovereignty or traditional values. But there is nothing traditional about undermining the independence of the judiciary. There is nothing patriotic about silencing journalists or attacking civil society. And there is nothing democratic about picking and choosing whose rights matter. As the SAC Group, we stand united, defending the universality and indivisibility of human rights. We must push back firmly and loudly against the erosion of these principles, because once we allow exceptions, once we allow double standards, we lose the essence of what it means to be European. Let us not forget, human rights are not a privilege, they are a promise. And it is our duty to keep this promise alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. We continue now to our free debate speakers list with Ayşu Bankoglu. Ayşu, you have the floor.
Mr. President, on March 19, the mayor of Istanbul and the presidential candidate of 15.5 million of Turkey, Ekrem İmamoğlu, was detained on politically motivated charges. In response, people claimed their democratic rights through peaceful protests across all around the country. University students, mostly young people, are the main voice of opposition and the key part of this democratic resistance. These demonstrations, however, are not solely a reaction to recent political developments. These protests come from years of growing frustration caused by long-term poverty, unstable living conditions, job insecurity, and the weakening of democracy and fundamental human rights. Erdogan's government, in response, launched a systematic campaign of repression directly targeting the youth. This is why what is unfolding today is, at its core, a matter of youth and youth rights. As such, it calls for a principled response granted in a youth rights-based approach that acknowledges both the structural conditions young people have endured and the legitimate nature of their demands. Young people suffer the most from harsh police violence, arrests and detentions, expulsions from universities, jobs and threats. Because the youth's dynamism, pioneerism, and resistance against authoritarianism frightened the ones keen on the keep power in their hands in anti-democratic ways. The fear of the government from youth will illustrate this practice. The common struggle of the youth will be the most important step towards democratization. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayşu. Next is Haik Mamiyanyan. Haik.
Honorable Chair, distinguished colleagues, over 50 states and 10 international organizations welcomed the finalization of the negotiations of so-called peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I have labeled it so-called because of the purported courteous concessions of the main negotiator from the Armenian side are far beyond the goodwill and are much closer to the betrayal. But we, the Armenian people, will deal with it ourselves. I would like to speak about the international community. It is going to be very hard to protect our citizens with those statements from bullets and bombshells fired and dropped by Azerbaijan. Those welcoming words, unfortunately, won't add defensive capacity of our soldiers to repel the aggression of Azerbaijan. Those statements won't return home innocent Armenian hostages kept in Baku and won't stop humiliating show-like trials on them. Why am I so skeptic? Because each day Azerbaijani armed forces are shooting at the borders of Armenia. Because each day we receive a new dose of aggressive rhetoric from Azerbaijan. Because my compatriots are suffering in Baku jail as we speak. And that's not the whole story. They are demanding from us to change our constitution, to dissolve internationally recognized negotiation format of OSCE Minsk Group, and God knows what else. There are new ridiculous demands each day. On top of that, a few days ago, Mr. Aliyev announced that they are not going to recognize rulings of ECHR. Earlier this year, Azerbaijani authorities informed the international community of the Red Cross about their decision to close its office in their country. I remind you that ICRC was the only international organization allowed to visit Armenian hostages in Baku prisons. So they are going to be left alone with the caprices of the dictator. So international community, the world has two options. Either to call to order Mr. Aliyev or kneel to the new hegemon. I refuse to kneel to dictator. Armenia refuses to kneel. Forgive my tone, but it's my job to represent my people. That's what I have been elected for. And here is what my people want: just and long-lasting peace. Not just a headline on the international media, not unilateral concessions, not imposed peace, but an opportunity to live with dignity and harmony. And if you are wondering how we got here, what are the reasons of the situation in South Caucasus, perhaps you should look to the bigger picture, at the bigger picture. The roots of the matter are much deeper than you can imagine. I strongly believe that if the world would hold accountable Turkey for committing the genocide of Armenians 110 years ago, Azerbaijan would think twice before executing ethnic cleansing in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Heik. I will give now the floor to Yorgos Stamatis, who will speak on behalf of the European People's Party. Jose Maria, be prepared, you will be the next. Yorgos.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, in this week we talk and we vote for very interesting reports, resolutions about the situation of human rights. But in the same time, this week, we have an economical war with taxes and war between the United States and Europe, United States and China, and United States with the rest of the world. We have to see the next day. We fight here for human rights. But what happened after this economical war? And we have to prepare for the next day. Maybe millions of our citizens, they have lost their jobs. So we have to find a solution in this economical war. Our planet changes, and we have to prepare. And how to prepare? We live in Strasbourg now, in this week. Have you ever seen how many homeless lives on the streets in the heart of Europe? Outside of Strasbourg, we have a hidden population from Roma communities. Does these people have the equal opportunities? We fight for human rights, for overall, from democracy, but what happens if in our democracy, in our countries, we have millions of unemployment people, and in this time we have a war, and we are not ready to respond. Of course, the governments are responsible to fight in this war, but we have to protect our people. We have to protect their rights, because they have rights, and we have to be more, allow me to say, active. So I think it's a great opportunity to this next session to talk about the challenges and the dangers of human rights after this economical war. We have to prepare our countries, our people, to be more active, not to the Council of Europe and the rule of law and democracy, but to educate them about the human rights, not only to vote for them. We have them to be part in our council. So for me, it's very, Mr. President, important to see what happened at the Council of Europe and Parliamentary Assembly, the results, if we have results in this economical war in our societies. Yesterday we talked a draft resolution about the relationship between Council of Europe and Latin America, and only we know what happened in some countries of Latin America, injustice, in economic war, and the role of the United States there. So we have to prepare our societies, and we have to fight more for our people. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Jose Maria Sanchez Garcia is next.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. I would like to devote my speaking time to strike a critical note when describing what I would describe as legal or juridical fantasies, which we often hear in this House. Moreover, these fantasies often emerge from people who have official roles, such as rapporteur on reports or opinions. This is not appropriate. Obviously, freedom of expression means that we can say whatever we want, even in some cases where it might not be specifically stating our rights. But when it's a rapporteur speaking, I think a certain degree of restraint and professionalism is required, because they are talking to other members in an official capacity. This week, for example. But this is actually quite a widespread practice, including the European Union. So we heard it said this week that the principle of non-refoulement is an absolute principle in international law. This is simply not correct. The principle of non-refoulement, non-pushback for migrants, hasn't emerged as a clear solution set out in international law. Far from it. This is a principle providing provisions where people who cross a border illegally can be pushed back in cases where and this is not possible in cases where the person is subject to prosecution coming from a country at war, a conflict zone, and so on. Whole series of characteristics which must apply to that person, which underpin that person's right to request asylum status, that is, of a political refugee. That is, of course, the logical position or place in which this principle of non-refoulement emerges. So I'd like to refer your attention to a recent decision handed down by one of the high courts in Spain, the 13th of June 2020, that refers to a European Court of Justice decision. And it became clear in that ruling that that principle most certainly is not cast iron. In the case talked about in that court case, somebody crossed the border in Melilla, the Spanish enclave, during a mass invasion of the enclave. It's located in North Africa. And the European Court of Human Rights states that the person in question was an illegal alien, which meant they could be sent back. There is also a decision from the European Court of Justice from June 2023. This is case 14322. It would appear that that ruling extends the protection of the President interrupts the precedent to people who aren't refugees. But that's little more than a trend, so it doesn't provide a legal framework at all.
Next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also to those of you that survived the week here at the Council of Europe. Valiant the effort of the brave. I come from Andorra. Our country is small. You can cross it side by side in 40 minutes. Some 90,000 people live there. 90% of the territory consists of rugged terrain, mountain peaks, and fields. Something extraordinary has happened to Andorra in the last few years. In just a few decades, we went from seclusion in the 1960s to an open economy in the 2000s. The economy grew in a way that few others have, increasing 50-fold, and the population multiplied 12 times. But I will tell you what this rapid growth has left us with. We became addicted to it. We became addicted to easy growth. In our narrow valleys, nature defined the rhythm of life. Homes were the immutable link between generations of the same family. Cutting down a millenary forest was an act of aggression against the community. Selling property to someone that wouldn't put it to good use was anathema. It was a bad thing. But this has changed. The most valuable terrain is now for sale to the highest bidder. Young people can barely afford to return, biodiversity suffers, and cranes have become a permanent fixture of our landscapes. We are consuming today what belongs to future generations. How can nature be plentiful if resources are drained? How may tradition shape identity if we stop knowing each other? because when we turn our backs on nature and on each other, societies detach and inequality ensures. Shared prosperity is out of the question if each is out for itself. What is happening in our country is not so different from what is happening across Europe. The tree may be taller, but the seed is the same. So let us not face these challenges in isolation. Let us recognize in each other the same hopes for fairness, for belonging, for a future that does not come at the cost of what makes us whole. We can learn from each other's mistakes and successes. We can build bridges where growth and sustainability are not at odds, where progress includes community, and where prosperity is not a privilege, but a shared promise. Let us choose to listen, to collaborate, and to act so that our countries, no matter their size, may help shape a Europe that is not only richer, but also wiser. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Serni. Richard Slessers is next.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, March 2nd, 2025 will forever be engraved in Latvian history, as our movie Flow received an Oscar for Best Animated Feature Film, surpassing titles from studios such as Disney, DreamWorks, and among others. It sent a strong signal to the rest of the world that the kind of creativity coming out of Latvia is not only unique, but something the world is ready to embrace. With our growing infrastructure, our skilled workforce, and stunning natural landscapes, I truly believe that Latvia can become a Baltic Hollywood. Now, setting aside my national bias, I recognize that every European country contributes to telling the collective story of Europe through cinema. Today, however, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to Eurimage, the Cultural Support Fund of the Council of Europe, which provided meaningful financial support to Flow and helped make this project a reality. Gins Zilbalodis Matīs from Latvia, Ron Diens from France, and Gregory Zeltzman from Belgium. These individuals banded together, thus unifying our nations in the pursuit of a cinematic success story for each of our respective countries. Eurimage provided valuable support for this collaboration. And now, looking ahead, Eurimage is preparing to launch a pilot program exploring series development alongside its continued support for feature films. Dear colleagues, as both a filmmaker and a politician, I want to express my deep gratitude to Eurimage, not only for supporting Flow, but for its ongoing role in unifying Europe through the power of storytelling. By embracing our cultural differences and fostering cooperation across borders, Eurimage continues to strengthen the shared identity that binds our nations together. Thank you, Eurimage. Thank you for your time, and Dievs svētī Latviju. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Pierre-Alain Frides is next. Pierre-Alain.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much indeed, President. I'm going to speak in French. I want to talk to you about the issue of declaration of conflicts of interest. This is a key component to strengthen the credibility of the Council of Europe. It's ever so important for each and every one of us when we are going to be tackling a subject within a committee. We're going to be drafting a report or observing elections, that we are not directly concerned by our own country, so that we have a neutral attitude here. And what I've noticed over the years is it's not always being respected. First of all, when it comes to election observation missions. For instance, if you're going to take part, if you're a member of a friendship group between your country and the country where you're observing elections, well, this means there's an incompatibility or conflict of interest. what has happened in the past, in fact, is that I've taken part in election observation missions, and I have one memory, in fact, that springs to mind, where one person who had been naturalized was representing their country in this election observation mission in the country where the family came from. And this was, as I said, an election observation mission for the Turkey referendum in 2019. And this can cause some form of a problem, because the person who had been naturalized, who no longer had the nationality of the country, but was, of course, fully familiar with the language and had their own views and opinions, and if afterwards the committee were to express a negative opinion on the election, this would, if you like, undermine the strength of this position, because the observation mission would seem less credible because there were people who could be seen as being subjective. There's also another case that concerns my country and also relates to Turkey, where the person who had been naturalized as a Swiss national was part of the election observation list, but that person was not granted access to the election observation mission in Turkey, and there were a number of issues related to this. And these are minor problems, but the major problem I'd like to raise here is that if you're going to be entrusting a parliamentarian with a report, that means that the parliamentarian will need to express that there's no conflict of interest. And what I've seen in some committees of the Parliamentary Assembly over the past few years with regard to reports or presiding over a network is that even though it was dealing with the country of the parliamentarian, that the parliamentarian said, well, there's no conflict of interest. And I think this is problematic. And of course, the rapporteur may well be seen as being subjective. And we've had some cases of this, in particular in relation to Ukraine. And we talked about this the other day. But I would like to underline the fact that in future, my wish is that for this issue of conflict of interest to be dealt with much more firmly, and that we ensure that people face up to their responsibilities, because there is no personal conflict of interest from a financial point of view, but of course there is a conflict of interest if we're talking about someone who is directly concerned by the country in question, where they won't have the same level of objectivity and neutrality that you need when you're within this assembly. You need to have people who are going to be tackling a subject, and it can't be possible to challenge them, and the report will gain strength as a result. Thank you.
I may just add a comment. I will not comment on the second issue. You are absolutely right, of course, that about the conflict of interest. At the first issue about election observation missions, you know that there is a procedure going on from Lord Blencathra, and I would like to ask you to be in contact with him so you will provide some ideas, because this is the time that we can change some of the procedures being followed for a long time in election observation missions. Thank you. I'm going now on to Fernando Torres Graziano.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. I would like to thank members of the Assembly for having given us the opportunity to take part in today's sitting. This gives us the opportunity to draw attention to the importance of this essential of the Assembly of the Council of Europe back at home, Mexico. Secondly, we can show solidarity. There's a very worrying situation in Mexico where gangs of organized crime, in particular drug traffickers, have been recruiting young people to insert them of the mechanisms underpinning drug trafficking. This has led to us to a crisis of abductions and disappearances of people. More than 100,000 people have disappeared in Mexico, and the authorities have provided no answers as to what's happened to them. A few weeks ago, it was realized, and this got worldwide attention, that there was a sort of a ranch, a rural community, which was acting as what some people described as an extermination camp. The government rejected that word and called it a training camp. So lots of young people, young men, young women, were taken to this camp and forced to undergo training. Some of them refused and wanted to leave, and they were simply assassinated, exterminated. We realized the extent of this problem due to a related issue. This is a very well-known movement in Mexico, the mothers who are looking for their children. These mothers who've been protesting for years have refused to give up. They want to know what happened to their children, their sister, their brother. So the fact is, in the camp, all sorts of personal belongings of people who've disappeared were found, and human remains were also found. So the fact is, what was described as a training camp was in reality an extermination camp. So I'm quoting this to make it clear how important it is for us to continue to fight to defend human rights. And it would appear that in many cases the Human Rights Commission in Mexico is at the beck and call of the government. We have to extend our solidarity to families, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, people who are close to these tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who've disappeared. It's very hard to give an exact figure or face to these people, but each and every one of them is in a person, and the mothers who've been demonstrating for all these years remind us of that. This is why we would call all of you to show solidarity with this mothers' movement in Mexico.
Fernando, for giving us this so of much importance information about Mexico. Dear colleagues, that concludes the list of speakers, and as you know, this sitting is dedicated mostly to the free debate. So if any one of our colleagues who has not been registered in the list wishes to take the floor, he or she can do it now. Emanuelis, aren't you going to take the floor? No. Okay. The debate is closed. The next item on today's agenda is the continuation of the debate on the progress report of the Bureau and the Standing Committee, document 16140, addendum 3. The Bureau has proposed several references to committees set out in addendum 3. These references must be submitted for ratification by the Assembly in accordance with Rule 26.3. Any objections successfully raised mean those references will be referred back to the Bureau. Any objection to these references? No objections. The references are approved. I now propose that the other decisions in the progress report, document 16140, addendum 3, be ratified. Any objections? No objections. The progress report is approved. We now have to come to the end of our business. I would like to thank all members of the Assembly, particularly rapporteurs of committees, for their hard work during this part session. I would like to thank the Vice Presidents who chaired during this part session: Bernadetta Coma, Elisabetta Gardini, Mogens Jensen, Marko Pavic, Agnieszka Pomaska, Lord Don Twig. I would also like to thank the staff and interpreters, both permanent and temporary, who have worked hard to make the part session a success. The third part of the 20 and 25 session will be held from 23 to 27 June 20 and 25. I declare the second part of 20 and 25 session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe closed. The sitting is closed.